Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're celebrating the juvenile joy of the Jackasses. And to join us in this celebration, we have Genre Vision sister, Dani Ryan. Hi, Dani.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Very good, and very glad to have you here. We have a lot of Jackass to get through, and Travis and I couldn't do it alone. We needed your help, so thanks for coming by. We'll be diving into that momentarily. Real quick, just a call to action this week to remind you all that, hey, if you like what we do here, go check out patreon.com/genrevision and become a premium subscriber. It's just $5 a month. You'll get access to all the bonus content for all the Genre Vision shows, including the stuff Travis and I do and the stuff that Dani and I do. If you like listening to all three of us, we still have our office Christmas party that we did last month, which was really fun. Check that out over at patreon.com/genrevision. All right, let's get into it, guys. Jackass. This is something the three of us have been talking about doing for a long time. I think something we have to acknowledge right out the gate is we were kind of the perfect age when Jackass became the cultural sensation that it was.
Yeah, so Jackass originally aired on October 1st of 2000. So thinking about that, I was like 12 or 13, which is pretty prime age for this kind of juvenile, goofy stuff. And they only showed it late at night, which meant that it was like extra taboo. So I was going to stay up and watch it. And when I first discovered it, I just immediately thought it was the funniest freaking thing I'd ever seen on TV. And I loved it. I love all of the stuff Jackass and its Jackass adjacent stuff.
For me, it was later. Like I didn't get interested in Jackass until I think the second movie. Like I didn't see the first movie in theaters. I didn't watch the TV show at all. And it was going on when I was in high school. It was like prime time for us to get interested in this stuff, like you just said. But I really didn't have a whole lot of interest in it until I saw the movies being really successful and they started to do interesting things. And it wasn't until 2006, that they did the second film that I really started taking notice of all this stuff. And I got really into it. Drew, what is your kind of background on this?
I mean, very much with Dani. I remember Jackass, the first season airing. I remember them advertising for it. I was catching it as much as I could, and I had a circle of friends that we were all into Jackass, and followed it semi-religiously. It's interesting, though, when I think about the show, the things that I remembered about it were more the pranks that they would pull and the gross out bits, stuff that would almost invariably involve puking on the show. But now looking back at the show, it's interesting that culturally more people thought about Jackass as the show that brought slapstick to a new generation in a brand new way.
Definitely. I think that it was sort of the slapstick, the grossness, the in-your-face attitude of it, the fact that it's just a bunch of dudes acting like jackasses. It was sort of refreshing in that it was not polished in any way, shape, or form. These guys were not celebrities. They looked like schlubs, just kind of your average nobodies, with the exception of like Knoxville and Margera. And he was a skateboarder, and it was the skateboard culture stuff too that I think made it seem a little bit more edgy.
Yeah.
And sort of made it seem extra dangerous and extra cool for that reason.
Well, this all sort of grew out of underground skate culture, the sort of resurgence of it in the late 90s and into the 2000s. As camcorders and smaller formats became available to skateboarders, once mini DV and high 8 became widely available, and people could afford camcorders that they could put lens attachments on and really build rigs that allowed them to free up, like you had this evolution of skateboard filmmaking. And I remember that coming up around the same time that skateboarding sort of took off in the popular culture, thanks to things like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It really started to reach a broader audience, this sort of skater culture. And so you had this level of filmmaking come out of that. And then I think Jackass is the natural evolution. It's like all of the B-sides of a skateboarding tape, all the bails, all the time people fall down on rails and hit their nuts. Like, turns out there's actually way more meat there than watching people land skateboard tricks.
Well, and I know that's actually part of how Jackass evolved, was that Johnny Knoxville, who's kind of the figurehead of the franchise, he was writing for this magazine, Big Brother, and Jeff Tremaine, I believe, was the editor-in-chief. And Knoxville was going to do an article about self-defense tests and testing different self-defense weapons on himself and writing about it. And Tremaine encouraged him instead to film it. And that is in, I believe, the very first episode of Jackass, in which Knoxville gets a taser, he gets a stun gun, he gets pepper spray. It's still one of my favorite Jackass bits when he gets pepper sprayed and he's like, oh, it feels like my eyes have gonorrhea. And that was kind of the birth of, hey, what if this was something we could do with some regularity? And I know that it came together between Knoxville and his circle of friends, and then also Bam Margera and his circle of friends were doing stuff under the CKY banner, which was kind of the very proto Jackass idea, in that sometimes it was skate footage, sometimes it was pranks, sometimes it was stunts, sometimes it was outright sketches and songs and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, Bam and that crew, Bam Margera, Ryan Dunn, may he rest in peace, Ray Keown, Brandon DiCamillo, the other, what's his name?
Novak, Rab himself.
Yep. They were all sort of a film crew. Like, they made little independent movies together on video, and they had their own sort of underground art thing going. And so in early Jackass episodes, like particularly in the first season, the show is this collage of sort of different artistic influences. You have the stuff that comes from Pennsylvania, and then you have the stuff that's coming out of LA. And the two are really, really different, I find, but they're kind of two different tastes that taste great together.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely peanut butter and chocolate. It's like you've got the LA stuff, which is definitely more polished and is more traditional prank stuff. And then you've got the, Pennsylvania stuff, which is just wacky. Like, some of it, you're just like, what did you smoke before you came up with this, guys? Some of the things they come up with, because their stuff's really, really dangerous too. And they do get in trouble with the police, and they do things that probably didn't pass, clearance at MTV, but they did it anyway. And I think that renegade behavior really helps temper the sort of more Hollywood side of it, because Knoxville and those guys don't get in trouble quite as much.
No, I mean, the Pennsylvania crew definitely gave Jackass, I think, most of its edge. Like, their stuff was always the most lewd. Their stuff was always the most sort of boundary pushing in terms of like legality, because they were legitimately like harassing people and destroying property. I mean, that comes from more of the skate world. And then you had guys like England and Knoxville who were doing the sort of LA stuff out there with Spike Jonze, who were more interested in creating these sort of scenarios that had sort of a high concept hook to them. Like, and they weren't always successful. Like, you had, Johnny Knoxville wearing a suit covered in meat, and then he would lay down on a grill and barbecue himself, or he would cover himself in bread and go lay down where a flock of pigeons was. And like, so much of this shit does not work, but it's more seeing like the conceptualization of it come through that's interesting, and like them trying out different ideas and them failing, because some of the stuff they do in the first season just isn't really all that funny.
No,
I found it really didn't take until season 2 for me to like be watching Jackass TV and go, oh, this is what I like.
Well, I think like you said, the first season really was literally just different types of footage that they were getting and compiling together as best they could. When that first season hit and was a monster success for MTV, like it cannot be understated how incredibly huge that first season was, because it was controversial, because it all, it drummed up the usual arguments of, oh, our kids are going to watch this and imitate it and blah, blah, blah. Like,
which we did, but
well, sure. But it's free press.
Yeah. But kids were doing that with plenty of other shit, whether it be pro skating, pro wrestling, kids were getting paralyzed and dying because they're imitating pro wrestling moves,
or Bart Simpson.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's always something that's, morally degrading our children. And that stuff usually ends up being far more interesting and entertaining.
This is why the Jackass guys like John Waters, and it's why John Waters and Johnny Knoxville are like, again, it's another chocolate and peanut butter sort of thing. They belong together.
They do.
So, the show takes off, and I know that they made 3 seasons, and even by season 3, from what I remember reading up on it, is that they felt that they were kind of done because they just got more and more battles with standards and practices that they just either lost or they didn't have the energy to fight. And they were like, we've kind of taken our content to a level that we can't really go beyond because we have the limitations of television censors. So the only thing that makes sense is to do a movie. And we get the first Jackass movie. And I remember, I did, see this in theaters. I'm sure you did too, Dani. It was an event. Like, it was a legitimate event in my life. And again, my circle of friends. And it was a theatrical experience unlike anything I've kind of ever had, because it was probably what would be termed rowdy now, as they have these rowdy screenings of movies, but everybody was vibing with the movie the way it wanted them to, in such extreme ways that I don't know if I've ever replicated that experience with any other movies other than the Jackass movies. Like the visceral reactions these movies get out of people, whether it be laughter or disgust or horror, like it is incredibly powerful stuff to be in the middle of.
Yeah, I didn't get to see the first one in theaters because I was slightly too young for rated R, and my mom was like, "Oh hell no." But I did get to see 2 and 3 in theaters, and 3 in theaters with the 3D with a full audience was one of, like you said, everybody was just so rowdy, and for everything gross, people were screaming and freaking out and, oh God, no. And yeah, these Jackass movies encourage you to just act wild and just to really enjoy them. And it's very primal, because it's just really gross, awful stuff. It's pain, it's bodily fluids, and people hurting each other.
I didn't get to see the first one in theaters either, but I did see 2 and 3 in theaters, but I never had the privilege through any of my screenings of having like a packed house. And, they did well in terms of like ROI. MTV didn't spend a whole ton of money to make these movies. However, they did do pretty well. Like the first Jackass, the estimated budget is about $5 million in terms of production. Of course, they spent much more on marketing, but it made only $80 million worldwide in 2002. I mean, adjusting for inflation, it obviously would be more, but still, that's not like a huge runaway hit.
No, but it helped launch sort of the spin-off shows, because at that point they were just, MTV2 was still fairly new, and that's where all the spin-off shows were. Like, I remember like Viva La Bam on MTV2 and Wild Boys. And I think that sort of the cultural impact was bigger than the money they made, plus the stuff, because you couldn't go in Hot Topic or Spencer's Gifts or any store in the mall catering to young people, that wasn't Aeropostale, and get anything without Jackass on it.
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely think the movie was a financial success, but like you're saying, it wasn't a blockbuster. However, I think its cultural impact was far more important than its financial impact.
Well, I'd love to know what it did on home video, because I'm sure the home video gross was like huge. Because they had an unrated DVD as well, which I'm sure sold gazillions of copies.
Oh, I am almost certain. And I think we do have to remember, it's like, yeah, this is 2002, 2003. This is when DVD has really finally started to encroach upon VHS as the dominant home video platform. Part of that was, the DVD sell was, oh, you're going to get all these unrated versions, uncut that you couldn't see. And with something like Jackass that is sold on how ludicrous and taboo it is, having that as an added, but like, oh, it's going to be the unrated version of this thing that's already feels forbidden in some way.
That's what they use to sell the theatrical cut of the film too. Like on the posters, it's stuff like, with stuff you wouldn't see on TV. Like they wanted to sell that sort of exclusivity and, the raunchiness of it all. Like Jackass as you've never seen it before, the most raunchy, the worst. That whole tactic sold a lot of fucking movie tickets and a lot of DVDs back then.
Without bleeps plus wieners.
Yes. Well, I mean, the first movie even has a bit in which Bam says to the camera, since we don't have to bleep anything, I'm going to get my mom to say fuck before this movie's over. And it's one of the best payoffs and laughs in the movie.
Oh, God, yeah, the alligator bit's great. And I guess this transitions into our enjoyment of the first movie.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the first movie on its own. And without just rattling off all the different bits, Travis, you had said before, and I think this is a good summation, is that the first Jackass the movie, feels like the show as a movie.
Right. It's basically the show, sort of like peak show on steroids. So it's the best of what the show was, plus just a little bit more gasoline in the tank to make it, that little bit much more polished and that much more cohesive, and to get really, really good music in it. Like, I remember I was watching the first one with commentary by director Jeff Tremaine and the cinematographer Dmitry Ilyashkevich and Johnny Knoxville. And the first scene that they shot on really, much higher quality cameras than they shot the show with was the scene where they did the electrostimulator pads. And for me, this was kind of like the first progression into the kind of, I don't know, newer, more polished performance stuff that they've done. Like, that scene isn't just them sitting around and hitting each other with electrostimulators. It has sort of a distinct art design look to it. This is where Spike Jonze's influence, I think, could come through a little bit more. Jeff Tremaine and Dmitry Ilyashkevich were talking about how the camera operators were complaining because these new cameras were heavier than just operating camcorders like they did for the show.
I could totally see that. And it's funny, if I watched it with the commentary with the full cast, and they were like, guys, why did this suddenly stop looking like shit when they get to that sequence? So it's funny because you can actually really tell, because when you get to that sequence, like, it's been more camcorder footage or even some looks like 16 mil footage. And then you get to that and it's a lot nicer. And you're like, okay. All right, they tried. There's a budget here.
They shot the opening and the closing of the film, with the makeup and the explosions and all that sort of stuff, and the giant shopping cart opening. They shot all that on 16 millimeter film so that it would sort of look like a big cinematic upgrade from the show. And they're talking about the sort of conception of what the giant shopping cart gag would be, and they were trying to make it look like the worst case scenario that Jackass sold out. And they didn't really accomplish that because people ended up really loving the giant shopping cart bit, and for good reason. It's fucking great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it takes, because the shopping carts bit from the show, which was literally just the Pennsylvania crew in some parking lot fucking around with shopping carts and throwing each other around however they could. Seeing the movie open with that as one of its images that became a touchstone for what people thought of Jackass, and basically saying this is the blown up, oversized, cartoonier version of what you think the show was. And I think the first movie kind of meets that goal. Obviously, that because they're a lot more free to do certain things, they still have limitations because they have to deal with the MPAA, but they can do a lot of stuff that they would never be able to do on television. And some of that is just cursing. Like, a well-timed fuck from one of the Jackass crew is really funny.
Steve-O pointing at that ceiling. I'm fucking sick of that fan.
Well, I mean, even early when they have a little baby alligator bite Knoxville's nipple. And he just goes like, fuck, you're twisting it. I think more so than sometimes the pain that's getting inflicted to them, the humor comes from this cast, that they are really good at reactions. And when you talk about the muscle stimulator, which is definitely one of my standout bits from the first movie, we're not able to see any real, it's not, like getting punched or hit or bit or something. They're just getting electrocuted, but it's their reactions, and they know they're on camera. So, it's a real reaction mixed with, I have to be performative on some level. And these guys are really funny when they're having to perform being hurt.
There's definitely an element of them being comedians.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I think too, you've said the Pennsylvania guys are sort of the rowdy skater crew, and then the LA guys are kind of the comedians, and their stuff is more traditional pranks and that kind of thing. And then there's Pontius and Steve-O, who are both just sort of like rodeo clowns.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're sort of the heart of Jackass, weirdly, and like sort of all of it together, like, is what makes it work. It's like you're watching some of these guys be total jerks to each other and do all this awful stuff, but then you're watching these guys be really, really close friends, and you're watching this camaraderie while they survive this stuff. And I feel like they all do really care about each other, and like that part of that is what makes it so endearing, even though they're being total dicks.
There is a meta like aspect to it where you are watching these men go through these, trials, but literal trials by fire. I mean, like making each other practically walk on coals. The bonding is definitely apparent.
Yeah, and that camaraderie will be important when we get towards the end of this. I think another thing that the first movie sets up, not only in that they're filming with better cameras, that they kind of have better locations. They think about where they're going to shoot things so it doesn't all feel kind of like stolen, captured on the street footage, are the tableaus.
Oh my God.
The show, and this is present in the first movie, but really evolves in the second one, is that they start to understand how framing a gag, framing a certain bit can be a huge part of the humor. Like in the first one, there's the tidal wave, in which it's just Knoxville is going to stand there and get knocked down by this giant wall of water. But it is all in the framing of that makes it so funny.
I think too, the like Grandpa falls asleep, like Spike Jonze in his old man suit falling asleep going down that hill again, like just the shot, just watching him go down, 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 and he just keeps going. And
I can't. Well, I'm just thinking, because you're talking about the Spike Jonze. This is another thing about framing, is when he's the old man on the scooter and he says his brakes have gone out, and there is a shot of just perfectly looking at the sidewalk, and he enters from one side of the frame and exits from the other side, and I'm just going, oh shit.
Yeah.
Or as Gloria, like we only see him from behind dressed as Gloria, and she's talking to this nice young man, and then finally we get the other camera shot and both of her boobs are hanging out.
Is that in the second one?
I thought it was in the first one.
I'm not sure he does Gloria until number 2.
Oh.
Yeah. It's all old men in the first one, and then he's women in 2 and 3.
Spike, they say in the commentary that everybody thought Spike was the best in the old person makeups, and I'm inclined to believe them. I mean, Johnny does some great stuff as the Irving Zisman character, particularly with the hanging balls later on. But
yeah, with dance to Peaches.
Yeah, Spike as this old man on the scooter is one of the best bits they did in makeup, because, even as Knoxville sort of grew in fame and he would have to use the makeup to sort of get around in public, Spike Jonze still isn't like a publicly traded commodity as like a celebrity. Like, sure, people know who Spike Jonze might be, but they're nerds. And they may not recognize him on the street, even under makeup. And his voice as the old people is just, it's really beautiful work.
It's great. But I think the first movie, again, not going to just sit here and list a bunch of bits, but I do, for every movie, kind of want to talk about the last kind of showcase bit. And the bit for this one is a prank. But it's also a pain stunt as well. It is the toy car.
Oh, butt X-ray. Yeah.
And it's very funny because I'm like, yeah, this feels like conceptually something that they could have done on the show easily, but they would never be able to get away with it because of censors. And they're like, this is such a great prank bit. Like, let's have Ryan Dunn put a toy car up his butt and then go to an X-ray technician to get an X-ray of it.
A crucial part of this bit working is the Cuban radiologist who does the X-ray. Like if their radiologist was any less, of a character, I don't think the bit would have worked nearly as well. Because yeah, it's funny to watch Dunn shove a car up his butt, and the conversation that Steve-O has about like his dad being disappointed in him if he were to do this bit, like that's wonderful.
That's great.
But the part where the Cuban doctor tells Dunn, like, you need to go to the hospital now. Don't tell anybody. And then he points at the camera operator and he goes, he already knows. That's too many people.
That's too many people. So that was the second clinic they went to.
Oh, wow.
Because when they went to the first clinic, apparently the guys pulled up the X-ray, pointed at Dunn, and just started laughing.
Yeah, it's not enough.
They're like, this is great. And they're like, oh, okay, well, so I guess we have to go somewhere else. So they went to the second clinic, and then that guy was like, you don't tell anyone. You don't tell him. He's too many. And then, he's trying to tell the nurse too, though. The look on her face when she looks at it is amazing.
Oh, the look of pure disgust.
Just pure, oh my God.
Well, so Dunn had that car in his ass for way longer than I thought he did.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that this is important going into movie 2, because Travis and I even talked about this, where the pranks on people in the public become less and less frequent in the next 2 movies, not just because I think they were, more popular celebrities and would get noticed, but I think they realized that doing pranks in public was going to be a lot harder and to get good reaction footage. And that's a really good, story that fact, Danny. It's like, yeah, they literally had to go to another place because they didn't get the reaction they needed. And by number 2, there are still those elements, but they are also now going international because they had done Wild Boys and Tremaine had a really good experience doing that. They go to Japan in the first movie, but there isn't really a lot of prank stuff that they get out of Japan.
They had some great bits. Danny and I were kind of talking about what happened in Japan, with Jackass the other day. And Danny, you were saying you really like the Japan stuff, but, I had to kind of watch it with fresh eyes when I saw this because of the whole controversy about that shithead from YouTube, Logan Paul, who went over to Japan and did a whole bunch of like awful, racist, stupid, distasteful shit. And I thought, well, how far away is that from Jackass, really? And and had to kind of look at the intention and the execution of every bit with a bit more side eye. And like, there's some of the stuff in Japan that is like wonderful, and it all really has to do with like who's the butt of the joke.
Well, and I feel like some of it's really innocent. Like Wee Man as the giant traffic cone.
Oh, it's great,
amazing. I like the pandas. I think the pandas are funny.
Yeah, I don't like the kind of shit where they're like knocking over street vendors' setups and like going in and destroying stores and stuff like that. I'm not into it. There's just a lot of kind of stuff like that seems really malicious. Like for any, like whether it's in Japan or not. It seems really shitty.
I was gonna say, because they did that all over the world, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. The only one in Japan I don't like is the gong.
Oh, it's my favorite.
Really?
Yeah. The part where Cossack, who is one of the best like punching bags in this entire Jackass experiment, because he's a great camera operator. He's holding the gong up. He's wearing this diaper. He's this big dude. He's like, he's got to be damn near 7 feet tall. He's enormous. And he's holding the gong up. And then I think it's Knoxville reaches down and goes under the gong and whacks him in the nuts. And like, these movies, I'm sure there were way more nut shots during production that we didn't see, but they chose the fucking choicest nut shots for us in the edit. And this one hitting Rick in the nuts. And then to add insult to injury, somebody comes up behind him and yanks his fucking diaper down. It's so good.
Well, and I think there's still good prank stuff on the public in the other movies, but it really became apparent that what I liked was like, no, I like these guys messing with each other because they all know the score. They're all in on it, even if it really is terrible what they do to each other. They still understand, like in some of the other supplemental stuff, multiple people in the cast will say, yeah, they did this, but it's footage. Like they understand that it's footage. And I have a respect for that. Like, yeah, even if you're getting horribly fucked with, which happens a lot on the Jackass sets, they're at least getting it as footage, and kind of transitioning into Jackass #2,
which I think has two of the worst ones in terms of people getting totally screwed over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to that as far as the the final big bit. I think Jackass 2 is such an upgrade from the first movie, not just because of what they're filming on or the budget, because obviously they were able to translate the increase in popularity to being able to do even bigger and better stuff. I just think Jackass #2 feels like they learned so much about how to make a Jackass movie by doing the first one that now they feel really polished and honed and know what to do.
Jackass #2 is such an upgrade because I'm looking at the list of bits.
Every single bit's good.
Yeah, like every single one is. I mean, obviously there are ones that are stronger than others, but some of them are actually kind of smartly repurposed stuff from the show, like, the mini loop. Of course, they did the big loop on Jackass, which is more of sort of an impressive stunt thing and not terribly funny. But to make it funnier, they do that mini loop, and it's such a victory, when they finally manage to land the loop-de-loop.
Well, and talking about pranking each other, very early in the movie, it's a simple, kind of almost there's not a huge impact, but it is one of the funniest bits in the movie is the Valentine.
There is a massive impact, Drew. What are you talking about?
Well, because there's so many times when they get punched, like Steve-O gets punched, and it doesn't like knock him down on his ass or anything, but everybody jumps at it. It's a great setup, and the build of that bit in which, like, okay, let's show the audience the bit, what it's going to be. It happens to done. Steve-O comes in, does it. He gets even closer. Then they get Wee Man, and the whole thing of there's an office chair that he has to stand on to go up and read it. And they're cracking up more, not that he gets hit by the thing, but they're like, why would there be a chair in a hotel hallway right here?
It's just such an artfully designed gag. Like, for anybody who hasn't seen it, the way that this is done is there is a heart-shaped piece of paper taped to the wall, and there's handwriting on it. And as the handwriting goes down into the pointy end of the heart at the bottom, the handwriting gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And so the reader's face has to get closer and closer and closer until the paper is revealed as not taped to the wall, but instead taped to a boxing glove on an air ram on the other side of the wall. It really is one of the most clever designed gags. And the simplicity of it is just so beautiful.
It's so cartoony. It's so funny. Well, and the way that they sell each other, like the way that they're like, hey, man, come look at this. Remember those girls from last year? Like, they totally bring the other guys into it to get hit, even after they just got hit.
Well, and that whole design of creating this device that is intended to do this one specific thing, like, this is, in no uncertain terms, art. I mean, this is sculpture. I mean, this is a piece of art, a machine that was designed to do a specific thing and designed to create an emotional response. Like, this is the evolution of Jackass for me. From the first movie where they start putting together like way better tableaus and widescreen and stuff like that, and then to this one where they actually kind of upgrade the entire artistry of Jackass in #2, elevates it to, I mean, I don't use this word hardly ever, but like masterpiece level.
I have to agree. I mean, Jackass #2 is one of my all-time favorite comedies, and there's just so many things that when I talk about why I love Jackass, it's not just the like, oh, it's not like an Idiocracy, ow my balls type thing.
Sure.
There's an element of that, sure, but I think about a bit like in Jackass 2, The Brand, in which Bam gets a hot iron brand of a little chode dick and balls on his butt. Like, that seems incredibly painful and awful. The real laugh comes when the movie fades to black, fades back up, and now there's like a 3 days later or something.
He shows his mom, and she's like, "That's not a dick; it's a dick farm."
Yeah. Well,
Dick farm done. Put a hologram dick on my ass.
But he's like, "I'm going to show Ape and Phil the dick on my ass." Correction. Dicks. Like, it's that delivery that cracks me up, and it shows that they understand it's not just about the punch, it's not just about the moment of impact being what's really creating all of this comedy.
It's about telling a story.
Right. And you know, there's some stuff that is not funny at all that I find incredible from Jackass number 2. Fishing for sharks with Steve-O as bait.
Yeah.
That is incredibly painful and terrifying.
Oh, Beehive Limo gets me. Like, Beehive Limo just absolutely destroys me. And the part that gets me is the marbles, that they put marbles outside the door so that when they're trying to escape this limo with a beehive in it, that they're going to bite it. Like, it's just the icing on the mean cake.
Well, I like that they're writing bits that evolve, like bits that have unexpected twists, you know, like, you know, the other guys show up in the limo and then Dave England has to shit really bad, which is probably part of the bit. You know, they understand that they're going there for a photo shoot, but all of the doors on the limo are locked from the outside. They dump the bees in. They're all freaking out. And then, of course, as soon as they exit the limo, what do they get is this big thing of marbles. Like, the bits start to become these gauntlets, these like longer gauntlets of things. I mean, they did literally a skate gauntlet, you know, to see who could avoid getting hit with big, heavy like sandbags on a skate ramp.
Right. I mean, there's just, and I don't know, when I think about Jackass number 2, there are reactions in this that I will still quote. I mean, in that fishhook bit, when Steve-O comes up and he just goes, "Thank you, God." Like, I love that. There's like a maybe 2-second piece of footage where Bam skates off the top of a roof and lands down and hits his face, and the camera perfectly zooms up to his face, and he looks into the camera and just goes, "Ow,
yeah,
fuck."
This one has the best mini bits. Like, they kind of, you know, stopped doing those as much, where they just had, you know, tiny little bits in between as sort of like interstitials. This one has the best mini bits.
Oh, absolutely.
And that "ow, fuck" is like, anytime I stub my toe or hurt myself in any little way, that is the exact reaction I always give.
Oh, anytime somebody asks me if I'm doing something and I'm kind of embarrassed that I'm doing the thing, I do Bam Margera's little sad "yeah" when they ask him if he's crying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's stuff like that. The pranking Bam with the wind tunnel because he's terrified of snakes. The anaconda ball pit.
Anaconda ball pit's great because they forget the second snake's in there.
That's the payoff of the bit.
That's might be the bloodiest Jackass bit.
I mean, as far as the movies go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although Butterbean does do Johnny pretty rough.
Oh God, yeah, he beats the shit out of Johnny in number 1. But I think if there's one bit in Jackass number 2 that sort of solidifies what I love about the movie and like how it amps up what its predecessors did well, is the card throwing gag.
Oh, the electric stool is one of the best and again, like we're saying, them pranking each other is way funnier to me than any, you know, kind of vox pop reaction.
Yeah. Well, and this isn't like a high concept bit where they can just explain what the bit is by calling, you know, and this is the blank. Like, they actually have to say, like, we've got a card thrower, he throws cards really hard, but instead of doing that, we're going to actually electrocute Wee Man's ass. You know, like, they have to explain the function of the bit.
And Wee Man doesn't get it either because he keeps asking where the card throwing machine is.
Well,
There's a fucking machine in here, man.
Where's the card throwing machine? like that again. Those are the things that make me die. It's not directly, oh, somebody's getting hurt in a funny way. It's their reactions and how because the one I will say, I think, going back to the first film for a second, I will say the worst, like the only Jackass thing that I physically can't watch is in the first movie, and that's when they give each other self-inflicted paper cuts.
That one's pretty rough.
That one makes me cringe, but I can watch it, and I think it's funny.
Yeah.
The part where Steve-O reacts to getting his lips cut, and he just goes, "That sucks."
That's great. Well, I can't watch it happen, and I think that's part of what I love about Jackass is that there is a variety. There will be something that will turn somebody off. Like you'll find your limitation.
The fart mask.
That one sucks. Anything with poop in it, I really don't really.
Yeah, we should out you as like poop stuff is just not.
It's just not my bag, man.
I can't do vomit, so.
Oh, then why do you like Jackass? It's like all puking.
I don't know. I guess I got used to them puking, but like as long as they're not eating it or it's not in their helmet with them, I'm good.
But let's talk about the final bit in number 2.
The best freaking sketch ever.
Terror Taxi.
I think it's their best bit.
So, Danny, what happens in Terror Taxi?
So in Terror Taxi, Danger Aaron is going to be a terrorist, going to the airport and talking about a big boom and a bomb and all this stuff. And he's going to be pranking the taxi driver, but the taxi driver's a plant. It's I'm going to murder this name, Chandrasekhar from Super Troopers. He's awesome. He's hilarious. And yeah, he's the taxi driver, and he totally turns it on Aaron and locks him in the trunk of the car and threatens him with a gun. And we get to hear Aaron crying in the trunk of the car. Oh my God, I'm going to die. And just Aaron's been such a shit the entire time, like filming this bit, that you're just like,
But like he actually does say some really funny things. Like, when he says boom, and then Chandrasekhar plays it perfectly. He goes, boom, what is that? And Aaron goes, boom, like kaboom and all that.
I love when Chandrasekhar eventually turns the tables on him and pulls a gun on him and is threatening him, and the whole crew is playing off like, oh my God, this taxi driver guy's gone crazy, and he's not only sabotaged the bit, but he's endangering Aaron, and he puts Aaron in the trunk of the taxi, and then Bam comes over and is like, hey dude, we're just filming a bit, and inside the trunk Aaron just goes, that's Bam Margera, he's fucking famous, dumbass.
it's so good. And then insult to injury.
Yeah, the best turn is when Aaron finally realizes that Jay Chandrasekhar is not a taxi driver. And he looks at him and goes, are you an actor? And Chandrasekhar goes, come on. It's like that moment was so perfectly timed and like so musically, poetically perfect that they didn't have to edit it as such. It was just gorgeous.
Yeah, and then he finds out his beard is made of the pubes of all of the other guys.
Oh God, they really pile it on.
I mean, it is. I think Bam looks into the camera at one point and goes like, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the best bit in this movie." like they know it's just this huge, disgusting, horrible prank on Aaron. And that's kind of why I think part of the reason it cements me, like, yeah, I like these guys messing with each other more than I do them pranking other people. Because again, like, even though all this happens to Aaron, he takes it in good stride, at least,
it's how they kind of managed to avoid controversy in terms of like what would now be termed, the current climate of social justice. It's like, who's really the butt of the joke in this? Like, is it a bit about Islamophobia? Is it a bit about racism? And ultimately, I feel like the answer is no. Like, those are components of the bit, but ultimately the joke is on this person who is asked to execute this incredibly, insensitive portrayal. But, by saying the joke is on this asshole, like, they kind of managed to dodge laser beams a bit.
I think it's brilliant.
I think that's something that they do really, really well in Wild Boys too, because like the joke is always on the Wild Boys, Pontius and Steve-O, which is the spinoff show where it's basically a nature show meets Jackass. And I feel like they nailed that too, because they could have really easily gone into sort of gross territory with a lot of the native tribes and stuff. And instead, it's pretty much entirely the native tribes laughing their butts off at these two dumb white boys. And so, yeah, I think whenever these guys are the butt of the joke, it works and its heart's in the right place.
Well, let's move on to Jackass 3 or Jackass 3D. I did not see this in 3D, but that's more to do with just my horrible fucked up eyes not working with 3D technology. But if I was going to see any movie in 3D, I think it would be Jackass 3, because this is by far the most polished they get in terms of production. I think by this point they know exactly what kind of stuff is going to work for a movie. And I will also say that Jackass 3D has the best intros of any of the movies, because There's a pre-movie intro with Beavis and Butthead,
3D.
which I'm a sucker for Beavis and Butthead, so that's great. But then the other opening credits in the first two movies were one big bit. In the first one, it's the shopping cart, and the second one, it's this big running with bulls type thing. But in 3, it's this giant cavalcade of different little bits done in slow motion with a camera that was called the Phantom camera, that's shooting at, such incredible high speed that they get these wonderful reaction shots of pain and shock and everything. And this intro, the credits to Jackass 3 is one of my favorite things in all the movies.
Yeah, that opening sequence is just so wonderful. It's interesting. This was the first huge technical evolution for them in terms of how they did production. It's the first Jackass film in high def video. Like Jackass number 2, even though it had sequences shot on 35 millimeter, was still mostly shot on standard def video. This was not only in HD, but also in 3D. And then also was the first Jackass film to feature, the first Jackass anything, I think, to feature slow motion.
Yeah, this was the first time they had any slow motion, and they use it to beautiful, beautiful benefit. I love the slow-mo and the 3D, especially combined. Some of the stuff in theaters was just, it was funny in a way that I didn't expect because it's so in your face. Like, oh, there's dildos flying at me. This is absurd.
One of the key bits to like how they worked with both 3D and slow-mo is, I forget exactly what they call it, but they take a ping pong ball that's painted like a baseball, and Pontius is nude and he's swinging his dick around, and they've censored the dick with a black bar, but the black bar moves and sometimes shows the penis. It's like they show the penis for as many frames as they can get away with to maintain their R rating. And then, of course, they show the moment of impact where his dick knocks the little baseball. It's just like, and the look of pure joy on Pontius's face could really only be captured like that in slow motion. It really is like the best case scenario in using these technologies.
But even so, I mean, there's a lot of great slow-mo stuff in Jackass 3D. A lot of my favorite stuff from that is not the slow-mo stuff. There's more self-pranking injuries, such as the high five.
Oh man, yes. That's the Valentine of this movie.
It is.
Except it's it's even better.
It really is.
Agreed. There's simple stuff. Like one of the simplest bits that they've ever done is in Jackass 3, but it's one of my favorites, and that's Super Mighty Glue.
Oh.
Just the pain that came from both of those.
When Bam has his hand, he has one hand on Phil's chest glued to it, and then the other hand on Preston's chest, and he starts using the two of them like a musical instrument.
It's great. I mean, I love that little kind of stuff. Also, we talk about gross out stuff, and the Jackass movies will always have something that will grow. In the first one, I think it'd have something like the yellow snow cone.
It's so cold.
The second one has plenty of options, but I think the standout gross out section bit from Jackass 3 is the sweatsuit cocktail.
Ugh.
It's heinous. It's absolutely heinous. I actually think I fast forwarded through this one on my most recent watch. I said, you know what? I get it.
Yeah.
I get it's just the build. That's unfortunate because the buildup of it when they're just collecting the sweat in different ways. They're like running a tissue or something down Preston's butt crack to get some sweat. It's
so foul.
And then squeezing it out into the cup. It's so horrible.
Hard no. The only thing I think grosser than that is Pontius drinking the horse semen in number 2.
Yeah.
Oh, but God bless Pontius, because immediately his reaction just, that's semen, all right.
Yeah.
I'm so ashamed of myself.
3 has everything conceptually that's great about 2, but it just has that additional technical polish to it.
And not just that, I really do think that they continue to up the ante in terms of design of gags and just the artfulness and how they're staged. That one Johnny Knoxville gag, The Invisible Man, where he gets into a ring with a bull and he's painted to look exactly like a background. And they at this point are so well versed in how to set up a shot to sell the effectiveness of a gag and like to sell the concept of a gag. And just to see him standing in front of that picture of the rainbow and the tree and so perfectly matching up, it's like they're fucking nailing it every time. What is it called? The field goal where they paint Preston up like a field goal post, and they have that punter kick the fucking football right into his mush. Ooh.
Right in my kisser.
Just the way he's crying on the ground for a minute is utter perfection.
Yeah, I mean, talking about tableaus, one of my favorites. It's a simple thing, but the setup of the image is so great. Is the Lamborghini tooth pull?
Oh yeah,
that was one they actually redid. They originally did that one for Jackass 2, but they did it with Bam's creepy uncle who got arrested, and so they had to reshoot it with Danger Aaron.
You know what? Good. I'm glad that Don Vito's not in number 2. That makes me happy.
Me too.
I don't think he's in any of the movies.
He's not.
Thank God.
Yeah. So
yeah, just Viva La Bam, which is the reason I've never gone back and revisited that, even though I love everything else. And I've gone back to all of that. I'm like, no, I really don't want to watch a pedophile. Thanks.
But yeah, Jackass 3. It's also clearly. It's so interesting because we've been talking about doing this episode for so long, and it was only just recently that they've announced that they're trying to make Jackass 4, which is kind of insane to me. But I'm going to be here for it. But it's going to be a little bittersweet, I think, because Jackass 3 was so clearly made to be a send-off.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the ending wraps it up so beautifully.
Yeah, I mean, the whole ending is the cast and crew as kids set to, Weezer's memories. Like, it's clearly, thanks for the memories. We're done. This is over. And I'm here for Jackass 4. I hope that there's some self-awareness. Son of Jackass jokes are great. Because they're getting there. I mean,
obviously, to get to, I don't want to put a bummer on it, but it's like, yeah, Ryan Dunn, unfortunately, passed away, died in an accident. And even, we won't have a Rip Taylor bit at the end, which is always just ridiculous to see at the end of all the Jackass movies, Rip Taylor coming out and being Rip Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly things that I'm going to be bummed about with Jackass 4, because it's like, yeah, it really felt like Jackass 3 was the perfect send-off. It's like these guys did this they basically conquered an entire decade. And, as far as pop culture is concerned, they showcase this because I really have immense respect for them as performers and comedians and certainly as, stuntmen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because while I'm sure younger viewers could enjoy Jackass, I don't know how much it's really stuck around for future generations, because now with internet video being so, constant in everybody's lives, it feels like Jackass can't really happen again, at least in the way that it specifically cornered the pop culture in its specific niche.
What's the tale of what's his name? He's like a YouTube children's entertainer. Blippi, is that him?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so there's this thing that he did as pretty much a Jackass or CKY style stunt before he got famous as a children's entertainer. And basically, it's him in his bathroom with a friend, and he shits like diarrhea all over his friend. Like, this is where these bits have gone. And since then, like, it's pretty much buried on YouTube, and he's been allowed to become a children's entertainer despite having done this thing that is, out there, but was kind of, buried a little bit. Like, not even, the article that I read about it wanted to depict, in a screenshot of what happened. Like, they had to draw a crude drawing to represent exactly what happened. It's like, I think we're staying away from this stuff a little bit more now. It's kind of gone away. And I think, the big reaction that came about as part of that Logan Paul idiot's escapades in Japan has made people a little bit more critical of this sort of stuff. And then I think a lot of the edges have been sanded off because of high concept content. Like, what is it? There's this Finnish couple that owns like a shop, like a workshop in, somewhere in friggin' Finland. And they have their entire YouTube career built of smashing stuff with a hydraulic press.
Oh, hydraulic press channel. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They're adorable.
Yeah. So I feel like the kind of stuff that Jackass has done has been split up into all these different tiny little subgenres that thrive on places like YouTube. But also YouTube is an incredibly restrictive platform. And the restrictions that YouTube has placed upon the art have really changed it. Like, there's really no place for underground content of this kind on the internet anymore because you can't monetize it on YouTube.
Right. Like there's a channel that I think is sort of the closest thing to modern Jackass. It's called Off Canny. In their most recent episode, they both learned how to strip on a pole and give lap dances, and then gave them to each other and all this other stuff. And they're both like 20-year-old straight guys.
That just sounds wholesome to me.
It's pretty freaking funny. They also went through like basic training type things together. Basically, it's just two dudes getting the crap beat out of themselves and each other. But even like pretty much in order to watch their videos, you have to be a Patreon subscriber. Like, you can see the cut versions, but you can't show any of this stuff on YouTube. Like, YouTube's become more censored than even a lot of television, which is kind of weird.
Yeah.
Well, and because here's the thing. Anybody can film two people and one of them kicks the other in the nuts and everybody will say, haha, that's, ow, my balls, funny. But I think that's what a lot of people's perception of Jackass was. People who may have liked it and certainly people who didn't like it. But clearly Jackass is so much more than just that. And, like we've talked about in the episode. And that's what keeps me coming back to these movies. Not only, certainly there is a nostalgia attached to them. We all admit that. But it is that there is something really special going on in these movies in terms of their filmmaking, the way that they're edited and put together, these different sketches. The camaraderie, the cast, and the way they act as performers, as improv comedians, whether it be during a prank or during a pain stunt, like they still have to come up on the fly with funny things to say, which is where a lot of the actual laughter comes from. It's not in the pain itself, it's in the aftermath.
Right.
It's in the aftermath, and it's in the artistry. And if people roll their eyes at me for calling Jackass art, so be it. But I think people need to expand their definition of what art is or what artistry is. Because, like you said, any two chuckleheads on YouTube can kick each other in the nuts. Or, anybody can, fall down the wrong way on their trampoline in their backyard and wind up on Fail Army in a vertical video. But what it takes is the artistic conception and the, frankly, brilliance of some of this stuff, the Jackass, to really create that lightning in a bottle. And if they're seeking to create it again, I'm curious, but I really do think that with Jackass 3D, they went out on top. Not only was the budget twice as big on Jackass 3D as it was on Jackass 2, but it made twice as much. It made over $170 million worldwide. And it was a big deal. And for them to go into Bad Grandpa, which didn't make quite as much money, but still made a really impressive amount of money at the theaters, it's like, well, there's clearly still change to shake out of the pockets on this thing. But whether or not there is more art and whether or not that kind of same level of artistry or that kind of same flavor of artistry can be achieved with a new cast, like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, as long as the guys are in it, I know that I'll be there to see them. Like, for me, the very, very large part of the draw is just that I like these chuckle fucks. So I'm there to see them.
Since we're wrapping up here, I will say one of my questions was, do you guys have a favorite cast member?
Yes.
Well, who's yours, Dani?
Chris Pontius. I think Pontius's just cheerfulness in the face of absolutely everything is delightful. I've seen him go through all kinds of awful, terrible stuff, both on Jackass and Wild Boys, and he's ended up in the hospital and stuff, and he's even laughing at himself in the hospital. He's just... enjoys life. He is party boy. And I just sort of love that about him. And he's a really good performer. And I just don't think he gets as much credit as some of the other guys do because he's not as showy or that kind of thing. Plus, he's Bunny the lifeguard. Bunny, that's my favorite character.
Danny's really on the money with this one. Pontius is the clear standout for me. I mean, one of the biggest laughs I ever get out of Jackass is the stare that he gives the camera right before he puts the gorilla mask on to do the prank on Ape and Phil. And just his look to the camera, and he says, it's going to be a blood orgy. And he sort of purses his lips and moves his head back and forth. It's like, this guy is one of the best sort of characters in the show because he'll kind of go, just the extra mile in terms of the performance, but he doesn't really get as involved in the extreme bits. Like he's, I think, a little bit more timid, and I like that about him. There's a sensitivity to him that I like.
Except when he's getting stung in the face by scorpions as Pontius the Barbarian.
I have long awaited this blood orgy.
I like where he just bails. He's like, "That's it, I'm over it."
Well, that shot of him pulling out and then going upside down, and just all the shit that they glued to his chin is still dangling there, and he's just like, "Yeah, I'm done now."
This might be a controversial answer. I don't know. I always look forward to a bit that features Danger Aaron.
Sure, me too.
Yeah, that's fair.
Aaron to me feels like the show's softest punching bag.
Oh yeah,
and big time.
And Tremaine has even said in some of the supplemental stuff in the 0.5 movies that they did that Aaron is always the last person they ask because everybody else will say no to a stunt. Like he's always the guy. So he usually ends up with some of the worst things to do. And he is the one that it's like, okay, if Aaron's involved, it's usually not some kind of prank thing. It's like, he's going to get hurt in some horrific way, and his reaction to it is just going to kill me.
Oh, same with England, like the fire hose thing with England and just the way he's screaming.
Oh, my ass!
England is my second favorite. And I do think for that bit in particular, a lot of that audio was re-recorded in post because you can't get audio that good. On set with that particular gag, no, it didn't happen. So I still think his simple stuff is really funny. Like he says, "Hi, I'm Dave, and this is my big green ball." Yeah, and then he just jumps off the roof with a big green exercise ball, and gets the wind knocked out of him. It's kind of perfect.
Well, and didn't he do the bike on the show, the little unicycle with the head that's bobbing back and forth on his crotch? It's there for 10 seconds, but it's funny.
Well, they do that in a bunch of different locations. They keep using that bit in the show.
And no matter what becomes of Jackass 4, I really hold this trilogy in regard. And I watched Jackass 2.5 and 3.5, and they're good. I mean, it's all pretty much stuff that they didn't think could fit in the other movies, and there's good stuff in both of those. I would still recommend them. But yeah, these are just a really fun time. And when you talk about, Travis, the artistry of it, it's clear that they have that kind of influence. Jackass number 2 ends in this big kind of Busby Berkeley musical and has a gag that's a direct riff on a Buster Keaton, the famous house falling around him bit. Mm-hmm. They understand the history of slapstick comedy in a way that I don't think is really present in a lot of current imitations of what Jackass is. It would be, to my read of things, more kind of ow my balls mentality. And that's unfortunate because I do think it's that artistry that elevates Jackass into something really, really special and continues to have kind of that potency to this day. And
you know what else? Last thing I thought of is the other thing that really elevates Jackass is those soundtracks. All 3 of these movie soundtracks are absolutely incredible. And some of these to the point where some of these songs, that's all I can think of is the scenes in Jackass. I love Peaches Fuck the Pain Away, but I always picture Johnny Knoxville shaking his butt with those goofy balls, or, little less conversation, little more action, the same kind of thing. The bees. The needle drops are amazing. The soundtracks are great. And it's funny and I can dance to it.
Yeah, All My Friends Are Dead is again, like, yes, and then Andrew WK's We Want Fun. Like they had such good taste in choosing these soundtracks.
If you're gonna be dumb, you got to be tough.
Yeah, a lot of the Roger Allen Wade stuff's perfect.
Well, I mean, I also think, talking about something like Peaches, like that was my first exposure to Peaches. Jackass #2, when they're trying to jump the English Channel, they play Wolf Mother. That was my first exposure to Wolf Mother. Mm-hmm. I think that was the best thing about them being associated with MTV was that they get great tracks for their stuff, and or even and it's not always modern stuff. There's some song when Knoxville's doing the roller buffalo bit, and it's just like, you can't roller skate in a buffalo herd.
Classic Roger Miller cornball tune. I love Roger Miller, and that's one of his best songs.
So good.
And it's a great song too, because it talks about sort of a commitment to personal happiness. It's a fun song.
So yeah, I mean the soundtracks are fantastic. These are just all around really fun times. Like every time I've watched these movies, like they just absolutely lift my spirits. No matter how many times I see bits like Spike Jonze is an old man going down the road going, my brakes. I can't help but laugh. Like, it always makes me laugh. So we had a great time talking about these, but let's move on to the shelf, where we pick some movies or other pieces of media that might act as good pairings or substitutions for our main topic. And as always, we encourage you, loyal listeners, to go to genrevision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. Dani, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Jackass?
So I'm going to take the easiest pick and go with something else that MTV and Jeff Tremaine produced. And that's going to be Loiter Squad, which is very similar to Jackass in that it's a group of guys pulling pranks and doing skits and just other kinds of sort of offbeat comedy. Loiter Squad, the guys in that are Odd Future, which is a collection of rappers, hip-hop artists, and some of them are actors and comedians too, and it's funny stuff. There's a bit with Seth Rogen in a tutu that nearly brings me to tears. And it's a really funny, really weird kind of take on similar stuff to Jackass, but definitely a little bit more millennial Dadaist kind of weirdness thrown in.
Yeah, I've definitely watched a good share of Loiter Squad, and I know they kind of there's a lot more just direct kind of sketch comedy and stuff, but it is like you're saying, I think more of like a mix of way more different things than just kind of the bits that Jackass was known for.
Yeah, it's got a big dash of like Whitest Kids You Know in it.
Yeah. That's a good comparison. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf?
Well, this is kind of a transitional thing. This is something that was created in Japan, but then brought over to America to be distributed, and then it was sort of rewritten for Americans. And this is Most Extreme Elimination Challenge, frequently known as MXC. Woo! This was originally a Japanese game show. I believe Takeshi Kitano was one of the hosts of it.
Yeah. I think it was originally called like Takeshi's Castle.
It's Takeshi's Castle. Yeah.
So and the Japanese game show is funny enough in and of itself. Like, this is the kind of thing that I've seen playing on old CRT TVs in Japanese restaurants. Where they'll have recorded like 6 or 7 hours of Japanese TV and it just plays in the restaurant. It's fucking great. But then what they did was they dubbed over all of the announcements and all of the dialogue, and they didn't just translate or interpret. It's entirely rewritten to be a completely different style show. In fact, every contestant who has a perfectly normal name in the Japanese version is given a joke name in the American version, and most of them are just really friggin' funny. One of the bits that will move me to like damn near tears is a person has to climb up what appears to be like a really slippery sort of almost like a lubricated slope, and they have this enormous paintbrush. I mean, that has to be about 6 feet tall, and the end of it is dipped in ink, and they have to draw a certain sort of character, and this person slaps out this kind of character and then falls away, and then one of the announcers says, "Oh my god, a catbird on a stick." And the way that it perfectly captures what that person drew is never not fucking hilarious to me.
It's really great.
I remember, I think it was Spike TV that would play on.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's like what I remember Spike. It was like, if you turn on Spike TV, 9 times out of 10, you were going to be watching an episode of MXC.
Yeah.
MXC or Cops. Yeah, basically.
And I definitely, I mean, my brother was really into it, and I have fond memories of that. And my shelf pick is actually going to be another Japanese show, not a recontextualized and redubbed one like MXC, but this is Gaki no Tsukai. It has a longer name, but that's kind of what it's known for. And it's a variety show, and it's a comedy group of pretty much these two separate comedy duos that come together to do this show, and they do a lot of different things, but one of the things they became kind of known for is their Batsu episodes, which is basically a punishment, is what Batsu means. And they would make some inane bet, like a sports bet, and whoever lost, they would come up with this crazy gimmick that they had to endure. And the one that introduced me to it is, if you just search pie hell on Google, you will find this video. And the idea is that the guy who lost the bet has to spend a day living in this house, and an announcer will come over this loudspeaker as if he's like the person themselves, saying like, oh, okay, I'm going to go brush my teeth. So the guy has to go brush his teeth. But all the while, all of his friends are in the house, and they have these just basically like whipped cream on plates, and they just pummel him with pies, and he's not allowed to react to them.
He's just going about what we call in my line of business activities of daily living. So it's getting out of bed. And the funniest one to me is when he's trying to smoke a cigarette, and he'll light the cigarette, and as soon as he gets it lit, bam! It's the timing of it is absolutely glorious. And like he's just forced to just wipe the shit off his face and wipe it out of his eyes with no reaction. It's glorious. He does such a good job at it.
There's so many where the voice will be like, oh, I'm going to make some toast. So that, he puts the toast in the toaster, and someone just, bam, puts a pie right on top of the toaster. It's so funny. And it's just this kind of, we're picking on each other and having a like when the voice is like, oh, I have to go take a shit, and he's sitting on the toilet, and they're just pummeling his crotch with pies. It's so good. So yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely kind of similar, in that kind of Jackass vein, where it's about the troop, and I think that's even with Loiter Squad and MXC. It's like there is a cast of characters here that we look forward to seeing every time we see them, and I think that's a really important factor to this stuff.
Yeah, it puts things in a context. I mean, yeah, I'm thinking of this YouTube clip now where there's this dude, it's a black guy who falls asleep at a party. And this isn't a sketch. This is a real thing that happened. And when he fell asleep, of course, he made the unfortunate mistake of getting too shit-faced and falling asleep on the toilet. And so the video is his friends busting into the bathroom and watching this dude basically completely passed out on the john, and they're going, he's asleep, wake up. And that's funny, but it lacks the kind of context and the larger framework that makes Jackass such a formidable body of work. Like, it's not just sheer volume of stuff. It's like, it's this lovable cast of characters that we've all, grown to love. That I think makes a huge difference.
Yeah, like I said, I think that's why Jackass 3D ending with them all singing memories and seeing, these flashbacks to some of the first sketches we see of them from the show, all this stuff. It's like that couldn't work if they didn't develop that kind of emotional connection as characters to us. Mm-hmm. Well, we do have to talk about last week's episode and the listener's shelf picks that we got for Neil Breen's Twisted Pair. Eric Fuchs suggested twins. I say that because he put it with a question mark.
He's questioning his own shelf pick.
Yeah, insane movie with too many ideas written by somebody who seems to barely understand them. Then he seems to supplement that with Southland Tales, baby. So I think that's appropriate, considering, Dani, you were on our Southland Tales episode.
Yeah, I was. And as far as incomprehensible movies, that's up there.
Yeah, it's one you go to bat for. Loyal listener Mr. Milksteak's shelf pick was I Know Who Killed Me, starring Lindsay Lohan, a completely trashy train wreck involving twins with giallo-influenced vivid color stylings and over-the-top, quote, acting that won me over against my own better judgment. I saw that movie in theaters.
I need to see it.
That might be something we could find a way to revisit on this show. I remember it being totally nutso. Might be one you don't know what you might have just done, Mr. Milksteak.
Uh-oh.
And our last shelf pick is from loyal listener Sunner Campbell. Their shelf pick was Only God Forgives, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But let's do some currently consuming.
Num 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 num.
Danny, what's been on your plate?
So I know you guys have already discussed this. You did a whole episode on it. I listened to it. It was great. But I finally watched The Lighthouse, because it was available to rent, finally. And oh my god, I love this movie. I had a wonderful time with it. I actually watched it like twice back to back, just because I was like, okay, there were things I missed. I gotta watch that again. And it just sort of felt like a fever dream I would have had during like sophomore year in college when I was studying all this early American lit and all of these, sea stories and Moby Dick and the Old Man and the Sea and all of that crap. And I do say crap because I had to read it over and over again, and it's too much. But this was great. I loved The Lighthouse. It did really just feel like it plucked all of those themes and concepts out of that type of writing and that style and made it more digestible and made it a really interesting story with such fabulous performances by its leads, and it's gorgeous to look at, and it's just basically handmade for me. So 2 thumbs way up.
Well, and I'll do some shilling for you. Everybody can go follow Danny at Dani Rat on Twitter, and you love this so much that you did a portrait of Willem Dafoe's character, and a absolutely phenomenal one. I love that. That's definitely one of my favorite drawings I've ever seen of yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty thrilled with it. And I started on the Pattinson one, and I'm really happy with it so far because he's got such sad eyes. I was like, I just want to draw his sad, sad eyes. Defoe's beard gave me a run for my money, though. Like, I had to really love that movie to sit through drawing that beard.
But the work shows that it's a fantastic drawing, and everybody should go give it their eyeballs for a second. Travis, what's been on your plate?
One thing, very quick. I've been playing a video game, and I'm playing it because it was on sale. It was like the New Year's sale on the Sony PlayStation Store, and it was like $14. And it's Just Cause 4. Have either of you played the Just Cause games or any of the Just Cause games?
I've watched my husband play them.
No, I've never played any of them.
Danny has like more of an idea of what this is going to be, obviously, but it's an open world sandbox style game. You play this guy named Rico, and Rico is an action hero. What?
I'm sorry. No, I'm just like, Rico.
Yeah.
You know what to do.
That's it. So your job is basically to cause as much chaos as possible. Like every single one of these games takes place in an island nation with an unstable, like fascist government, and your job is to bring it down. That's every Just Cause game. And basically each one is kind of a small variation on the last one. Just Cause 3 was kind of a basic variation on Just Cause 2. I've never played the first one. And, with Just Cause 4, it's the same tradition. It's all the stuff from Just Cause 3, just amped up a little bit. The big twist in this one is that you're trying to destabilize the fascist government in a country that is trying to develop a means of controlling the weather. So there's all these different, like regions where there's this very violent sandstorm, or a region with a really violent tornado or a really violent lightning storm, and you have to find ways to avoid that. But at this point, it's basically an open box or an open world sandbox game that is entirely reliant on the game's incredibly unique method of character movement. Like, there are vehicles. You can steal helicopters and planes and cars and have them, flown in for you all you want to, essentially. But that's not the most fun way to move around the world, because you're given what basically amounts to a grappling hook on one hand that will pull you across really, really long distances at a really high rate of speed and won't cause you any damage. So it's a total disregard of any kind of real world physics, because you could like fall from 30,000 feet, and then when you're 10 feet from the ground, as long as you grappling hook to the ground, you don't sustain any damage. That's insane.
okay.
And then not only did they give you a grappling hook, they give you a parachute. So you could, in theory, like grappling hook to a spot really far away and then break your grapple, open your parachute, and then like parasail there basically on your own wind. And then in the last game, they didn't only give you a parachute, they give you a wingsuit. So you could zip line, open up your parachute, start floating, and then transition to your wingsuit and then fly to your location. And then in the DLC for number 3, they give you a fucking jetpack. And in number 4, you have all of that together. So really the best way to get around the world is to use these different methods of movement. And it becomes very, very fun just to move around in the world and blow shit up. That's Just Cause 4. It's fun. It's not a particularly great game, but that whole open world, physics sandbox thing is real fun. That's all I've been currently consuming that I can talk about today. Drew?
Well, I checked a big target off of my list this week. I watched Robert Altman's Popeye.
Okay.
I love the Popeye cartoons. They're some of my favorite kind of, cartoon shorts of all time. And this was always a movie that was a curiosity to me because it was clear that it had a very mixed reception. Even its legacy seems very mixed. But it's like, well, it's Robin Williams, and this is I think 1980. So this is real early Robin Williams. This is Robert Altman. It's a big Robert Evans production.
And Shelley Duvall.
Can't forget about Shelley.
I'm going to talk about Shelley in a second because I came out of Popeye saying I think this is somehow both a mixed bag and kind of a masterpiece. It's an incredible vision, like the intention of what Altman wanted to do, which was to make the Popeye Broadway show movie. He does that, and he nails that vision 100%. It's kind of incredible. And the fact that they built this little island town called Sweet Haven, which is still standing today. All the sets that they built are still up, which is incredible. It's very impressive. And the fact that it's a movie that understands it's based on a cartoon, Robin Williams is walking around the movie with these giant prosthetic arms on and stuff. It's totally bizarre. So, the production design, the tone, all of that is great. The cast is pretty good across the board. Shelley Duvall steals the movie. Like, she runs away with it as Olive Oyl.
That's impressive when you have Robin Williams in our lead role.
Yeah, I mean, Robin Williams is doing great stuff, but at the end of the day, he is still, being asked to kind of do an impersonation as a role. Like, he's impersonating a cartoon character and doing his riff on it. And he's great at doing that. But Shelley Duvall is Olive Oyl in that. I can't believe it. Mm-hmm. And her comedic timing and her propensity for physical comedy is absolutely a joy to watch. She also has the only song that I think is pretty good.
Oh, that's right. It's a fucking musical.
It's a musical.
It's a fucking musical.
And this is the thing. I have no problem with musicals, but the songs in all of this, and I don't have the lyricist up right now, they are all so repetitive to the point that it had to be a cognizant choice. Every song has a chorus that is basically one phrase repeated over and over and over and over and over and over again.
It's like a Bollywood film.
I know there are a lot of people that like the songs, and it's probably because with a lot of these kind of musicals, you saw it at a young enough age that they dug their way into your brain. I have plenty of movies like that on my end, but the lyrics are just not good because it is just like Bluto, the villainous character Bluto's song. His song is basically just, I'm mean, he's mean, I'm mean, he's mean. Like, that's mostly it. But it is an impressive movie in terms of its commitment to its cartoonishness. The production of it all is so flabbergasting to the point where it's like, yeah, this can never be done ever again. It's over. We'll never see this kind of a production from a major motion picture ever again. And there is great cartoony stuff. The movie really does commit to the cartoon physics and kind of actions that a cartoon would do. Like, Popeye will punch a guy and he'll stick in the ceiling of a building and just stay there. Or he'll rocket through the water, propelled just by the power of spinach, and punch a giant fake octopus in the face. It's astounding. I don't think the movie is actually good. It's under 2 hours. I want to say it's about maybe like an hour 45, but it feels way longer. But I really admire it. It's a movie I really have, now having seen it, have incredible admiration for, even though I think it is kind of fatally flawed. It's fatally flawed in a really interesting way. So I would love to hear, I'm sure our audience has opinions on Popeye, because it seems to be a movie that a lot of people have very fond feelings for. So I'd love to hear that. But let's wrap things up with our comment of the week. And we're going to go back to loyal listener Sunner Campbell, whose shelf pick was Only God Forgives. His reasoning was that Only God Forgives is a movie I admire more than I like, although I like it quite a bit. And he says that it felt like Refn took all the criticisms about Drive and said, "You ain't seen nothing yet," and kind of made it a reactive movie. And he says, it feels like the director's talking to a wider audience, saying, "This is me, this is who I am." With Breen, like we said, it feels more accessible, more inviting. With Refn, it feels more like a challenge, like he's saying, if you're here because you thought Drive was cool, this is what you're getting into. And Travis, you had said that there was a moment in Twisted Pair that made you think of Only God Forgives.
Yeah, there's this scene that's like a total non sequitur that I can't even really place in a proper context in the film, where we see this red lit hallway and there's a door, and on the door is the number 23, which could be an homage to The Shining. It could also be an homage to the Jim Carrey film, The Number 23, because, Breen likes conspiracy films. But, like, it's a very nightmarish, like, red hallway. And you know what? Only God Forgives takes place, like, 50% of the entire movie of Only God Forgives is, like, red, scary hallways.
Yeah.
And very slow pacing. And, like, there's a scene where Ryan Gosling will be wandering through a sort of nightmarish magenta red hallway, and there'll be a door, an open door, and then he'll be dreading what's coming through the open door, and then something will chop his fucking arm off. And I feel like Neil Breen either saw that and thought, yes, this is what I'm into, and included that scene as part of the fabric of his film, either intentionally or unintentionally. It reminded me so heavily of Only God Forgives, I had to write it down as a note. I should have mentioned it in the episode, but I'm glad Sunner Campbell kind of picked up on similar vibes.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Sunner. And now that we're wrapping up, thank you, as always, Dani. We love having you on for these episodes.
I love being here, and I will come on and talk about guys kicking each other in the nuts any day.
Well, who knows, with this year's schedule, we may have another guys kicking each other in the nuts movie to talk about. We'll see, but we want to thank you for coming on, and we want to thank you, loyal listeners, as always, for checking us out. As always, I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Bunny the Lifeguard.
I'm Pontius the Barbarian.
And I'm Danger Aaron. And we'll be back next week with our Q&A episode for this year. The first one. We might do two. We usually do two, but our first Q&A episode for 2020. So we hope you'll come back then and listen to us some Qs. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.